This is the Man is to Win podcast, and we're glad to have you back. Today's episode is sponsored by Habitly.com. Habitly.com teaches you soft skills or habits, new behaviors that will change your life. So managing your time better so you have more time in the day to do things that are more important. Setting and achieving goals rather than setting them and then forgetting them. How to avoid conflict, how to resolve it when you're in it, and lots more. Check it out at Habitly.com. Today's episode is with Shea Gerhardt. She is the founder of Buderflys. Now, this is not a nature conservatory company. This is Buderflys, an earbud company, Buderflys. And they're doing something radical. Do you ever find that your earbuds are uncomfortable? They made comfortable earbuds, but that's not the focus of our podcast, although we touch on it. Really talking about how she came to this decision of taking on the Goliaths in the earbud industry. And it's a great story. She shares what she's learned, some things that they're doing. And I have to say, if you're an entrepreneur, you want to listen to this podcast because Shea and her team are doing some incredible things. And I love it. Could have talked to her for hours. Let's dive in. Shea, I'd like to start with a question. You have decided, you were very successful, and now you've decided to take on some of the biggest companies in the world with Apple and Beats and these different things with Buderflys, what you're doing. What made you decide to do that? I mean, it's like David taking on Goliath. And I really love your story. I love what you're doing. And the thing that you're addressing with Buderflys, Buderflys, that you've designed. But let the audience know what drove you to go up against these giants.
So yeah, I mean, I sort of feel like in any space you get into, I come from the perception that, or the belief that any category is up for grabs as long as there's a consumer need and a path to grow market share. My background is going into big industries, crowded industries, finding a path to growth, and have been very successful doing that in my past. So I hear that a lot. You're going after the giants, but if you think about it, this market, so the headphone earbud space is a $32 billion industry today. There's no two single brands that own more than 50% of the market. The biggest brand in the market right now is Apple, and they only own 34% with Beats and AirPods. 34% is fine. That means there's 66% of the market that's up for grabs, right? If we didn't take a single Apple user, and there wasn't a single Apple user who needed long-term comfort, who were super into what we're doing, we would, even if we had 1% of this market, we'd still be $1 billion company in the next few years, because they're projecting that the industry is going to be just earbuds, and they're taking headphones out of that category. Earbuds is going to be a $152 billion market. There hasn't been much change. That's the biggest thing, right? So in the earbud as we know it today was invented essentially 15 years ago with the iPod. That was meant for 20 minutes of music listening. No one expected what we were doing today, which is the habits have changed dramatically, so much so that we're listening from 1 to 7 hours a day with our earbuds in. And that habit shift, and the only real differentiator that's happened in 2015 or so, or 14, Bluetooth technology became stable enough for mass consumption. So they moved to a wireless functionality. All earbuds in the market did. But besides that, the only real differentiator on the market is how they talk about it, the color, and the price point. And so that is a huge indicator, as this is a market that's ripe for innovation and disruption.
Well, it's interesting when you say that, because not only, so for those of you looking at video, you can see that I'm wearing an Apple iPod in my ear. I use a regular mic. And then on my desk, which you can't see, but I'll hold them up, I have some headphones that I actually love to put on and listen to music while I do writing, but I only can do it for about an hour or two. And then my ears get really uncomfortable. And I actually don't like my Apple AirPod. It's not necessarily uncomfortable, but it pops out, and I don't really like the design. So it's very interesting for me to hear you talk about that in response to my question. It looks like, this market's all nailed down between Apple and all the clones you have on Amazon, et cetera, from China and everything else everybody else is doing. It seems like it's just a really crowded market. But then you said, what about comfort? And how did you, so you said it's uncomfortable. Then where do you go with that? I mean, because how did you know? Were you an expert in comfort as far as what somebody puts?
No, by no means. But what I was an expert. So I listened to a ton of audiobooks and podcasts, and I would anecdotally say to my friends, hey, have you checked out this audiobook or this podcast? Awesome. You should, it's so funny, whatever. Most of my friends would be like, no, I can't wear earbuds that long. They fall out, they hurt, or they get that achy feeling after a bit. I didn't actually have that problem until one night we had 3 little boys, and my husband was like, we live in Colorado. And my husband's like, it's a powder day tomorrow. Why don't you go skiing by yourself? Which when you have 3 little boys like that, it's just I love them, but having a vacation like that was awesome. Doing what I love. And that night though, there's huge traffic issues getting up to the mountain. So that night I was like, I'm so nervous I'm going to miss this 5:30 or 5 a.m. Window to beat the traffic. So I'd fallen asleep with the wired AirPods, so the old white wired AirPods that came with every device we had. That, and woke up with crazy aching, sore feeling in my ears. So I hadn't really had that problem until that night. That morning, they're all made the same. All earbuds in the market are made with what's called a plastic clamshell material design. So it's essentially on the factory line, they just snap the 2 parts of the headphone together. And there's a seam to it. So I split that seam open on the AirPods, took out the components, put them in my kids' swimmer's wax, and comfortably wore them all day. And the sound environment was so much better because it was like a near perfect seal in my ear. Even with those they don't have super technical speakers in them. It sounded so much better. Plus I had the pressure of my helmet underneath my on my ears, and it still did not cause that achy, sore feeling. And so that next Monday I had come into my office, and at the time, my CFO, I was like, listen to what I invented this weekend. And he's like, yeah, right. And so we did a ton of research. He's like, this has to exist. So we looked around for it. It didn't exist on the market. The current industry solution is that little rubber foam or ear tip that comes on the end of a number of devices. That has done little for comfort, but it helps a little bit with walkout when they fall out. So when we did a deep dive into this, we learned that the human ear is constantly moving when you talk and chew and exercise. That constant movement against that hard plastic clamshell design is causing continual friction, and it causes ear fatigue, soreness. The other issue is that sound vibrations, when they come through that plastic, causes what's called sound fatigue in your cartilage. And then the last issue is because your ear is moving against that hard material, it's called walkout. It scoots it out of your ear. So that's why they fall out of your ears. And while that's a really good business model for those who have those earbuds, that they have to replace them every 6 months on average is what wireless earbuds are replaced at. So we set out to solve that, and we came up with an earbud that continually flexes with your ear as it moves. It never has a hard state. It has a damping effect, so the sound vibrations doesn't come through that material design. And it flexes with your ear, so it's not walking it out. And it's been awesome. So it was awesome. And I mean, anecdotally, I was talking to a former head of Philips headphone and earbuds. And he said to me, he was like, he had ordered a pair of earbuds. And he said to me, he was like, I can't believe this. At Philips, we spent millions and millions of dollars and almost a decade trying to solve the fit issue, because fit and long-term comfort are the number one complaint in the earbud industry. It affects 87% of the users of this $32 billion market.
Wow.
And we knew it was the golden ticket to the marketplace. And I can't believe this tiny little company out of Colorado has solved it after we had the best of the best trying to come up with this. And you guys nailed it. I can't believe it. So needless to say, he's investing in the company, but which is good.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. So it's, how do you then attract people and get them to stay to this new concept where there's so many Goliaths, and it can, it'll scare a lot of people, particularly good people that are in very high paying jobs with large companies. And you need some of those people, as well as the wild-eyed entrepreneur folk who want to join your venture and take on Goliath. How do you attract these people and keep them?
And because I've worked in startups for a good portion of my career, this is always an issue. I mean, I think you probably recognize this. If you have an entrepreneurial spirit or bug or whatever you call it, it doesn't really matter. You're in it for the growth of the company and the thrill of doing the unknown. So I say that, I mean, you still need to pay people well, and we always, give equity. But we hire for that entrepreneurial spirit, because we've hired people who, in my past, I've hired people who were Ivy Leagues, top of the class in their field, and they come in and it doesn't work in a startup. Like, they want the big money, they want the assistance and all the support that comes with that. You don't get that in a startup. And so we really found that hiring for that entrepreneurial spirit, hiring for curiosity, which is one of our biggest brand values, and I can tell you more about that in a second, but, and then hiring for, sort of someone willing to think outside the box, because that's what we need. There's no path to growth here that it has been defined in the past. And the Goliath thing, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but think about it, like any productivity tools that are coming out, and there's millions of productivity tools coming out, any SaaS products, they're all going up against the Salesforces of the world, all those big guys that, and then, so the classic stories are Airbnb. They went after the hospitality industry, and that is enormous in a way that people were like, no way is this going to happen. And I had that, like, just like the Philips guy, but I had that people say that to me, like, hey, we can't, there's no way you can do this. Someone would have come up with it. Like, why would you think you could do this? And you think about Uber and Lyft, they came out, and the taxi industry was a whole different beast, right? That's a little bit like the mafia. But no one thought you could do it differently. And they're like, no, we can do it differently and better for today's use case. And those are all people coming from outside the industry, finding, seeing a path to growth and a need in the marketplace and delivering on it.
Well, it also reminds me of Steve Jobs. So like Steve Jobs, like the Lisa wasn't the first computer to use that type of interface. Xerox PARC had come up with it. When he did the iPad, it wasn't the first, tablet type of thing. And even the phone, the iPhone, it wasn't the first phone.
No.
But he found a different way to do it. It sounds like that's what you've done. Before I forget, though, I want to ask you, you brought up this curiosity piece, and you said you'd talk more about that. Talk to me about that piece.
So one of the other things that's important when you're entering a crowded industry is that you can't be everything to everyone. I said earlier, the pain point that we have solved affects 87% of users. However, we're going after a tiny slice of that, and we've essentially created our own category in this industry. So in the earbud industry, every single brand uses music artists or athletes promoting music as their sexy sort of ambassadors to their brand. We've completely flipped that on its head. And when we did a deep dive on earbud usage, heavy earbud users, they love music, but like they're only listening to music on cans or in home speakers or on the stereo or on the car stereo. That's because you can get way better sound out of that than you can in the earbud space. Earbuds primarily are used for audiobooks, podcasts, streaming video, phone calls, and, meetings and such. That we've sort of defined this as the spoken word category or the knowledge seeker category. So our whole brand is predicated around this concept of the curious mind. And those who, that, and do you listen to a lot of podcasts? I know you have a podcast, but do you listen to a lot?
I don't listen to a lot. I listen to some.
Okay. Well, that moment when you get like 20 minutes to yourself and you get to choose something that feeds your curious mind. It's like a brain vacation in the middle of the day. And it stimulates new thinking, and it gives you pause, and it helps you sort of work out things in your head or just laugh, like listening to a funny podcast or something that is so thrilling where you take your mind off something else. Like those moments are so important, I think, to those who care about it. Why would they have, they shouldn't have to put up with the pain and the issues with today's earbuds. So that was one of the impetus for us creating Buderflys, is to give them this near seamless experience where it was so comfortable and so light in your ear that you didn't even feel like they were there, but you just got this information. Like I think about it, like sometimes I listen to a ton of audiobooks, and like I feel like those guys sometimes are my mentors. So I'll give you an interesting story. So I was in Telluride, Colorado, which is like the most beautiful place on earth. I was there for capital raising event for 10 days. And I went out one night, and I had a friend up there, and she was like, let's go out with locals. And I was like, I don't know, I have so much work to do. And she's like, you always work, like, let's go out one night. So I went out one night. I ended up sitting next to this woman who was a local. She's the top residential architect in Telluride, which is like a different story, because like the houses in Telluride, 2 million-ish.
Yeah, probably.
And she's like, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, well, we have this earbud company that we have developed for heavy audiobook podcast listeners, and we're going after those knowledge seekers. And she was like, oh, do you know this guy who, and I'm just not going to say it out loud, but the head of one of the huge content, like biggest well-known brand content players in the world. And I was like, yeah, of course I know him, because he used to be a writer. He wrote for Rolling Stone magazine, and he's written a number of business books. And I essentially thought of him as like my mentor. And the way he built his company was so interesting, and it was slow growth. And honestly, it changed my life to be able to have access to content like that. So she was like, yeah, I built his house on the mountain. I like picture myself like, so where exactly? Like, I'm going to pop out of the bushes. And she was like, but in Telluride, the mountain, you don't drive into town because it's this tiny little slot canyon. You take the gondola. If you are on the mountain, you just take the free gondola into town. So for the next 4 days, I just rode the gondola, and it was like the views were spectacular. And I was practicing for a pitch, and I don't love timed pitches. So I knew I had 18-minute ride, and like people would get on and be like, hey, what are you doing here? It looks like you set up your office. I'm like, yeah, this is my office today. And do you have 5 minutes? Because here's my pitch. But it got a little awkward when like I went by the lifties, and they'd be like, are you staying on still? I'm like, yeah, this is my office.
So wait a minute. So wait a minute, Shea. So you were basically practicing your pitch on people you didn't know on the gondola. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes. I
love this. This is fantastic.
Audience. I know. But it was really interesting from that perspective. Like we had, all different demographics, every demographic, old, young, different cultures, different ethnicities. everything that we're getting on and off. And so pitching this to them and getting a deep understanding of how to talk to people, how to understand what they care about. Is this, how does this resonate with them when you talk about comfort? And then you talk about how the ear is constantly moving. And I always see people going like this. Oh yeah. Moving their jaw around. But I never ended up meeting this guy. Then we had the pitch at the end of the 10 days. And then they had like an investor meet and greet afterwards in a bar up there. So I just had a glass of wine and someone was like, I think he's in the back of the bar. Cause I had investors up there and I'd be like, hey, if you see this guy, will you text me? And they'd be like, oh, Shea, I don't know if I want to be part of this. So everyone I was around knew what he looked like. And so I went up to him and I was like, essentially, I made my product to make your customer's experience 5,000 times better. And he's like, okay, what you pitching? What you peddling? And I mean, honestly, I was like, the best, I was like, just meeting him was like all I was in it for, really. And, long story short, he started vetting us pretty hard and then ended up coming in and investing in the company. So I can't remember. Oh, curiosity, I guess, is where I was headed at. But also,
that's where it started. Yeah.
Embarrassingly stocky grit.
No, I love the story. And it sounds to me like in your backpack, purse, whatever you carry, you need to always have like 2 or 3 sets of your Buderflys. So you can just kind of whip them out and say, hey, if you don't believe me, just pop these in your ear, see what you think, type of thing.
Yeah. I actually should do that more often. My team actually does that more often than I do, but yeah, it is. I mean, it's a world of difference and it's really comfortable. And we also have a feature that the longer you wear them, the more comfortable they become because they work with your body heat. So they actually get more comfortable over time.
That's amazing. Yeah. I was thinking when we went back to the hiring, I was thinking that, you kind of go through a process. So I teach hiring where you look at the person's resume and evaluate that. You do a web search, you do a phone screen, you do an in-person or in-depth Zoom. And, at that point, you should be ready to make an offer subject to reference check, background check, type of thing. But you may have one more interview where you do more test drives, is what I call, not hiring somebody without a test drive. But I thought that, if you have somebody, you thought they were really good, but you feel like you need that edge. It's like you almost would have them try on a pair or give them a pair, whatever's appropriate, and just say, just put these in and see if you're excited about these enough where you would like to change the world with these. Because that's what we're out to do. And it was just like, well, that'd be like the closer for the right person.
That's good. I've actually never done that. But I mean, obviously most people come to us because they're interested in the space because it's a pretty cool space. And it has a ton of potential. But yeah, I think that's a great way to do it.
The other thing, it struck me as though I love the way you're going after the curious, you're going after the people who are knowledge seekers, that type of thing. And you told that great story about stalking that guy, which I won't report to the police. Don't worry. And then, but it occurred to me, down the road, there may be another avenue is to go after like ear doctors and other people that are dealing with people that have ear problems, in part because it's affecting their ears. I'm sure that would be a much smaller market and not a primary, but it just strikes me that the way you went about this opens up new markets and new ways to bring it to market. Whereas where I started was, hey man, this is all closed. Goliath and his buddies got everything, got the gate locked up. And I love the way you said, hey, nobody's got it locked up. And that's what history shows too. Civilization after civilization stops leading. Yeah. So I love it. I love it. So what has been your biggest challenge, separate of stalking this guy, in your career? What's it like the biggest thing you've had to overcome that was really meaningful for you? I mean, I'm switching tracks kind of drastically, but I'm just curious. I really like your story. And what was kind of a turning point for you?
Again, that's hard. I have dyslexia, which I have there's a lot of sort of baggage that comes with that, especially because when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of knowledge about it, right? And so, but I also know, and, know that most successful entrepreneurs have dyslexia. The reverse also happens, where a lot of successful white collar criminals also have dyslexia. So there's an element to it, right? There's an element to it where because we think so differently and so unconventionally, we have an ability. And I've had one of my team members said to me the other day, she's like, I think you can see around corners where no one else can. It's like you have this, and so to really embrace how that thinking differently, because in school, it doesn't work, right? You are sort of required to do things the way everyone else does it. You have to work a lot harder to find different paths to growth. The advantage to that is you get rejected a lot. Like, there's a lot of times where you are constantly getting rejected and pick yourself up and have to move on. So I do think that's why a lot of entrepreneurs also succeed who have dyslexia, because they're not afraid to fail. And so I think that is embracing that understanding of how I've been successful for both throughout school, and then throughout my career has been important. The other thing I would say is, and you and I talked about this a little bit, but is this, the best way for me to grow is to have that Socratic dialogue or debate, essentially, about things. And not everything warrants that, but when you're figuring out strategy that doesn't exist, or determining a growth path for the company, to have real in-depth discussion about all the holes in your thinking is so important to me, right? But that's naturally how I've always learned, is just that constant trying to convince, I debate it. If I find holes in it, or I find a better way of thinking of things, that's the most thrilling thing that can happen to me. Throughout my career, I was in an executive role for like 14 years. When you do that to people who work with you, sometimes they think you're like attacking them or challenging them. And it blows me away every time someone's put off by it, because I think, oh, everyone likes to learn this way. Everyone is going to grow by a rigorous discussion or debate. And there is a lot of times where you have to understand, and I think it seems so simple and cliche, but understanding how different people think, but still being able to get the most out of it, I think was really important. And I'm sure you're like me, where a lot of times I can see 10 steps ahead. And a lot of times, you have your people who are they really need to understand step 1 and then step 2. And they don't want to talk about step 10 yet. And that took me a while. Like, I had a boss once who was like, you got to let them catch up. And it's not that they were not as smart. It's just they had a different way of thinking, right? And you've got to let them get to the same place you got to. And it was such a wise piece of advice I needed. At the time, I felt like admonished, like trouble, but it was really important. And so I've started taking that with me my whole career.
Well, that's awesome. And please don't misunderstand my laughter at your white collar criminal
no,
comment.
You should laugh.
Because when you mentioned the dyslexia, quite frankly, it choked me up for a second. But in regards to what you just said, the way I put it to people is that I only have one bias. I just want to find the best way to do it.
Yeah.
So if you can speak to me respectfully, you can tell me I'm dead wrong.
Yes,
and
me too.
I love the conversation.
I love that. Me too.
Me too. Just tell me and explain why, and let's talk it through. I have no problem. I want you to stop me if I'm going in the wrong direction. Yeah. But the other part of that, really going through where you're seeing 10 steps ahead is you may have someone else who has a tendency to do that. But if you go 10 steps ahead, they're going to live in step 10, but you haven't done steps 1 through 9.
Yes.
And you may have the capability to work through steps 1 through 9, but they're going to immediately jump to step 10. And so as a leader, we've kind of put them in a bad spot. But It's wonderful that you've learned how to work with people and how to do that. And so talk to me, normally we would end the podcast about right now, but I want to just know a little bit more about your company, how you're growing, what's happening with your people, because I love what you're saying. I love who, we're only meeting. I love who you are and what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. So how is it going right now? How many people on the team? What's going on with the growth and that type of thing?
So we are growing really fast. We launched about a year and a half ago. We've done very little marketing because we started selling out every month. Demand far outstripped supply, which is a good problem to have. But we just hadn't anticipated that. So we've just upgraded all of our manufacturing facilities so we can start releasing about 50,000 units a month, which is a lot better than what we were at, where we were. And so, things are incredibly good. And we have a very interesting 3-year roadmap. One of the things we're doing is if you're a heavy audiobook or podcast listener, there's a use case right now where people hear a cool quote or an interesting fact where they will pause, rewind, like let's say you're riding a bike, right? Pause, rewind, write it down. Pause, rewind, write it down. You can tag it in the app, but no one ever goes back to it. So we are creating a productivity, on-the-go productivity software system on the actual earbud. So you could, if you are riding your bike, you can activate our earbuds, either voice assistants or swipe. We'll record the last 20 seconds, the next 20 seconds, translate that to text, add the metadata. So who the podcaster is, author, what the platform is, Spotify, Audible, and then you can voice tag it. So this is my paper on Abraham Lincoln. I love history, so I reference those. But and then you can either share it with your, online productivity tool like Evernote or whatever you use, or you can share it, or send it to like your buddy, like, hey, I thought this quote would resonate with you, or whatever it is. But it's just a really simple way to continue to enhance our growth mindset, curious-minded people, target audience, and make their lives easier and more simple. And so we are very wholeheartedly focused on that vertical that we've created in the space. And like you said, like there's a ton of other places we could go, right? There's a female line we could have a medical line, we could have a B2B line where we did all call centers, because this would be way better experience in call centers. So there's a lot of, and then the hearing assistants, we all have all that capability. So that can be another category we can go to. But when you're entering the market, you really have to stay hyper focused. And unapologetically, we are not about music. We are about this knowledge seeker space.
Yeah, and I love it. So what you just described is me. So I will listen to a podcast, and the biggest problem I have is that I want to take notes. And so I want to remember that last 20 seconds or longer, or I want to at least remember where I am, and I'm driving.
Yes.
So, and I don't want to pull over, and I don't want to deal with it when I'm driving because I don't want to do something. So oftentimes, but also like if I'm listening to, I listen to Hillsdale College trainings on government and civics and how the country was formed and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And like they have Constitution 101, which is like one of their most popular courses because people aren't taught anymore how the Constitution was set up and stuff. And I'll be listening. I'm like, oh, wow, that's really neat. I want to, because I'm also writing a book on my personal time. And I'll want to, say, oh, yeah, but where was that in the thing? And how do I take notes? Because if I'm listening to Hillsdale College on my browser, on my phone, I can't jump to the notes app. Without stopping the podcast or the recording, which I do. So your method is exactly right up my alley where I'd be able to do that.
It's such a simple, elegant,
and add my note.
Yeah.
And I don't know any way I can do that today.
No, there isn't a way. Otherwise, we wouldn't be putting this much time and money into it. But I mean, I just have to stop. Did you go to Hillsdale?
Oh, I wish I did. No, I did not.
My dad went there. I'm like, how do people know about this tiny little college?
Well, I know about it. Just I'm concerned about our country, and Hillsdale is focused a lot on returning to the Constitution fundamentals and true equality for everyone type of thing, and smaller government. And so they have some teaching that appears to be, fact-based, historical-based. And, you're not going to agree with everybody, but I like their approach. And I've actually met with Dr. Arnn of the college, the president of the college.
Oh, cool.
And talked to him about something. I met with him one-on-one. Great guy. And he means well. No one's perfect. He means well. But I love what they do. And they have charter schools and stuff. So, yeah, that's cool. Your dad went there.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know people knew about it. So that's
Well, I think a lot of people don't, although they've got like 4 million people on their Imprimis newsletter list. So, all right, well, let's close up. So if people want to learn more about what you guys are doing, where do they go?
So if you're looking to start your own company and you just want to bounce ideas off someone, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn at Shea Gerhardt. And if you want to check out Buderflys, go to buderflys.com. So BUDERFLYS. So like earbud. No T's, 1D.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show, Shea.
Yeah,
this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, it's been so interesting. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you like the episode with Shea, please leave us a comment or a rating as you heard in the podcast. Shea and me, we're just focused on how do we do things the best we can do. Again, thanks for joining us. Don't forget our sponsor, Habitly.com, can change your life for pennies a day. Stay tuned. We've got more great guests coming. Bye for now.